Hey guys, welcome back to Tech Talk Education. My name is Dr. Heldman. Hey, have you ever been in a hotel or an airport or something like that and you want to get on the free Wi-Fi and you're redirected to a page where you have to log in, maybe even pay some money if it's at a hotel, something like that? That is called a captive portal, and we can use pfSense to create our own captive portal. So I want to show you how to do that in this video. Let's get started. This should be a lot of fun. Okay, so here you are. You're looking at my pfSense router. It's running right here. And then you're looking at the dashboard for pfSense. We're up in the main user area. Remember that pfSense does certain things. So it always has a LAN port at 192.168.1.1. That's the default. It's configurable. You could do something different. You'll notice here that I have three optional ports that I built: option 1, option 2, and option 3. These happened as a result of a previous video that I did on how to create an ethical hacking lab and then how to extend the ports. And in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to rename a couple of these ports so that they can be used with, let's say, a DMZ and also with our captive portal. So first things first, I'm going to go in here. I'm going to minimize this, and it has to continue running because we're using pfSense for clients to get out the door, to go out to the internet. So it's got to be running, and I'm fine with that, and I like pfSense very well as a product. But then you manage it all from a web dashboard. So in this case, you can see that I have gone to 192.168.1.1, and that is the interface. And now we can get started, and I'm going to begin by renaming these interfaces. So I go to the interfaces section, and I pick an interface here like so. And you can see that its description is going to be opt1. And this is listening on a virtual Ethernet port called EM2. And so you'll have to memorize those ports. Linux uses different port names, and it varies by Linux distro. So the easiest way to figure out what it is that you have, in the case of pfSense, you can look at them and you can see what they're named: EM1, EM2, EM3, and EM4. Ubuntu names them something different. Kali names them something different. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So if I bring up the command prompt here and I type in ifconfig or ipaddr, either way, and I go out here and look at eth0, you can see that it is called eth0. If I'm in Ubuntu, it gives them a different name and a number set. So you'll have to be aware of this. Depending on the distro of Linux that you're working with, it's going to name these virtual adapters, or in this case physical adapter, something different. eth0 here, this is a virtual adapter, I'm sorry. But it's going to give them a different name depending upon the distro. So in this case, we're looking at this adapter here. It's called EM2. And what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and rename that. I'm going to call this captive portal, like that. I don't need to change anything else here. You can see that in the previous movie we made it listen on 2.1, which is fine. There's no problem there at all. It has a /24 mask, which is 255.255.255.0, and I'm going to go ahead and save this. Now while we're doing this, I'm going to go in here to interfaces and go to opt2, and I'm just going to rename it DMZ. DMZ stands for Demilitarized Zone. It's from the Vietnam War era, and the idea was that there was a place where fighting didn't happen. In this case, when we're talking about security and we say something like a DMZ, we're talking about an area that is protected by equipment that protects our inside network. And it has a different name, but if you're talking to anybody that is my age or even younger, they're going to call it a DMZ. But that's what we're talking about, is an area where things are relatively secure. We have firewalls inside the DMZ, we have routers inside the DMZ. I'm going to name this DMZ, and we'll use this in a different video. So I'm going to apply the changes. And then the third interface, I think what I'll do is I will get rid of it. So I'll save this, save the changes here. And then I'm going to go to Interfaces, Op3. I'm just going to disable this interface and click Save. So now we have some interfaces. If I look out here, I have LAN, I have WAN, which is the thing that points outside to the internet. LAN, which is my regular network, that's what Kali Linux is on. And now we're going to do a captive portal interface. Before I go too much further down the road with the captive portal idea, I do want to stop and just take a minute and talk to you about the idea of that you could put a second network card in the machine that's running pfSense. Like maybe you've got a dedicated machine that you're running pfSense on it. You could put a second network card in there, and you could dedicate that to something like a guest Wi-Fi where you're going to run a captive portal. I'm not going to do any of that. There's no need to. But the idea is that you want to understand that what we're doing is we're segmenting networks here. So we've got our primary LAN network, and then we have our captive portal network, and we created a DMZ network as well. And this stuff will refresh upon restart of pfSense. But now the next thing we want to do, once we're ready to do this, is we go to Services, and we go down here to Captive Portal right there. And you can see that there's nothing in there right now. We don't have a captive portal installed yet. You see the green box over here. We're going to add a captive portal, and we're going to give it a name. So it wants the zone name. So the zone name I'm going to do is going to be called Captive Portal. And I'm going to say that this is for guest Wi-Fi users. And this has been around quite a while. They're very common. They're very popular. You can expand on this and use this for bring your own device, BYOD, and things like that. So this concept is really out there. It's especially prevalent at hotels and airports. Some hotels decided that they wanted to charge you $15 a day or whatever to access the internet. I don't know if that blew up in their faces or not, because a lot of people were using Wi-Fi hotspots on their phone to get around that. And so I've even heard that some hotels have the ability to block a Wi-Fi hotspot. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's a big issue. Hotels want to make some money, and so they charge for getting onto their internet, and they use a captive portal to do so. So we're going to save this right here, and then I'm going to go ahead and enable it. Now there's lots of choices here, so let's scroll down through here and look at some of these choices. First thing I would draw your attention to is there are tons of different menu options here along the top, and we're currently in configuration. And the next thing that we're going to do is we're supposed to pick out the interface that we're going to use for our captive portal. I'm going to select Captive Portal right there. So now I'm going to arrow down here a little ways, and you can see that we have some other things that we can fill in. Some of this stuff you don't necessarily need to fill in, some you do. Max current connections might be something that you get interested in. If you're a hotel and I've got 300 rooms, I could potentially have 600 connections depending upon who's in the restaurant, whatever. But we can limit this. Let's limit this to like 5 max connections. And just for experimentation's sake, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, but this would be something you would consider if you were setting this up in a corporate environment. I should point out to you that this number doesn't necessarily indicate how many users are actually connected, although it may be the case. What we're talking about here is concurrent connections. So we're saying we're going to allow 5 of the same IP address to connect to the internet using this. So that's what they mean by when they say concurrent connections. Now another thing we have is the idle timeout. So somebody walks off, they're going to a breakout conference or something like that. They leave this thing connected. When should we time them out? I would go with a default of say 60 minutes. Maybe you do it a little bit longer, but notice that if we leave it blank, There's no idle timeout. That's very bad. I don't think that's a good idea to have that in place. And then a hard timeout is when, hey, man, we're done and you're off. We're going to get you off of this network now. And well, we'll set it for 90 minutes. This may be something where you decide to leave it blank if you want people to be connected. But in our case, we're going to set it for a hard timeout of 90 minutes. Now, there's another interesting field here that you might want to look at. This is called traffic quota. And the idea is that you want to limit users. This is a captive portal, so we don't want anybody in there just downloading whatever or watching a streaming movie, something like that. So maybe we decide that we want to limit this to the amount of traffic that we're going to allow them to get. And that's going to be effectively a little bit of a throttle on input into their machine based upon what they're trying to do. Now, notice this is in megabytes. So I'm going to leave it blank, but you could go with 12, 25, whatever. The idea here is that you're limiting users to the amount of traffic that they can drag across the wire while they're on the captive portal. Okay, now we have some URLs where we can redirect people and things like that, like pre-authentication URL, after authentication URL. You would get crazy and start making some web pages to redirect users to different places. The thing that I'm going to do is bypass a little bit of this. It's fairly self-explanatory. The pfSense help screens here are really, really good. But what I want to do is I want to talk about the way that we can control the bandwidth per user. Now we're talking about per user. And if I select this, I can enable bandwidth restriction. Now you have two sections. You have a download section and you have an upload section. Typically, we want to, you'll notice that uploads are going to be a little bit faster than the downloads in some cases. In other cases, like maybe at your house, you can get really good download speeds, not so fast on the upload. In this case, what we want to do is we want to have users give them some sort of comfort zone for downloading, but we don't want to make it so much that they could just download massive pieces of software or games or movies or whatever it is that we're trying to do. Now you should notice that this is in kilobits per second. And so if I type in 10,000, 10,000 kilobits per second, that is a 10 meg download, which is fine. Today's internet and networks can handle it. And let's restrict this to, say, 2,500 kilobits per second upload, which would be 2.5 meg. So all we're doing here is we are restricting users to the amount of upload and download bandwidth that they can consume at any one time while they're on our system. I want you to notice here that you have a lot of things that you can do. So you could use a custom captive portal page. What that means is that you create a portal page for users to hit. You've seen this in hotels and airports and places like that. That's what's happening here. They're hitting a custom page. Now pfSense comes with some default pages, and they look like you might expect. They have the pfSense logo in them and everything. But if I check this box just to see what's required, you can see here that we have to supply a regular HTML page for them to hit. This is the portal page. And then it has to match something like this, a form, HTML5 form, for example. And then we have to supply an error page, and we have to supply a logout page. So that's what I was talking about. You get on, Dreamweaver or whatever it is that you use to create web pages, and you create these pages that are customized. You can include whatever images you want, however you want it to look for your captive portal page. I'm going to uncheck this and blow past this set of menu options. Now, after I uncheck this box here, you get this special menu here. You also have the ability to upload a custom logo if you just want to put up a logo in place of the pfSense logo, custom background image, and even a background image. And you could type in some terms and conditions for use on your net. Why would you do that? Well, if somebody does something bad or untoward and you go and you hire an attorney and you're going to do something about it, with this person, you want to make sure those terms and conditions are laid out ahead of time so that when they check, okay, I want to use your network, they are essentially agreeing to the terms and conditions. That's why this box, even though it looks really empty right now, is actually super, super important. Now, at a minimum, what I would do if I were doing the terms and conditions, I would put the copyright symbol in here, left parentheses, C, right parentheses, the year, all rights reserved, and then put your name in here, with the name of your company or your name, whatever, like so. In fact, I'll put Tech Talk Education. And all you're doing here is you're putting the user on notice, hey, I'm reserving the right to stipulate what can and cannot be done on this particular network, and if there's trouble, I'm going to come talking to you about it or get an attorney or whatever. Under authentication method, I want to talk to you really quickly about some really robust authentication that you might be concerned about if you're working in a corporate environment. You're probably not going to be concerned about it if you're doing this just at your home. So it's called Radius, and the idea is it uses two things. So it needs a database that's going to keep track of user accounts, so users log in, log out. So there's a user account, database, username, password, whatever. And then it also requires a certificate. So the two combined together are Radius. Now, Cisco has essentially an equivalent of this, which is called TACACS, T-A-C-A-C-S. TACACS does the same sort of thing, but the idea here is that you want to know that you have to have a certificate authority, it's called a CA, in place, and a Radius server in place if you're going to point this captive portal to Radius. Now, if I'm at Denver International Airport, I'm kind of thinking they probably have a Radius system there that handles this stuff, but I don't know, maybe a hotel does. This is something you want to think about if you're going to set up a formal certification, authentication method. I'm going to leave it blank. I don't need one right now. So I'm going to say none don't authenticate users. And then we were talking about a certificate here. If I enable HTTPS login, I must supply a server and an SSL or a TLS certificate for this work. I'm going to leave this undone, but please be aware that right now we are natively doing HTTP. We are not enabling HTTPS. Okay, if I click Save now, I show my captive portal out there. This is great because you don't have any users connected, but you could sure tell just by looking at the pfSense interface how many users you did have connected. So this is really cool. Now let's pay a little bit of attention to those previous menus that I talked about at the top of the screen. 3 of these are limiting. So the idea here is you're going to limit who can connect to you by MAC address. So we're going to have to find a way to grab their MAC address or have them key it in or something like that. If this was a captive portal for, say, BYOD, bring your own device, I don't know, it might be hard to get a hold of a MAC address. Allowed IP addresses might be the way that you want to go because they're going to pick up a DHCP address, and either you'll give that to them from a DHCP range that is authorized for BYOD. Maybe we use allowed IP addresses to further reduce the amount of traffic, or even host names. You could use a computer name, a host name, and reduce the traffic that way. These are just all settings that you can put into place. So the vouchers tab here, if I click this, allows you to create activation of roles with vouchers. And the idea here is that you've got somebody authenticated, they get a voucher, they can use this captive portal, and you see that you can control the number of minutes per ticket and the number of tickets and so forth. We have a high availability section here, so we can enable backward high availability, that's a hard word to pronounce, availability sync for connected users and used vouchers. So this goes back to the voucher thing. And then the file manager is used for you to upload things like your CSS sheets that you want to use for your captive portal pages, JavaScript, things like that. Now in order to test everything, we're ready to test the captive portal. I've got to be pointed to that 2.1 network. If I tried to go to 2.1 here, I'm on the 1.1 network, it's just going to take me to the login page for for pfSense. If I look down at the settings for pfSense, you can see that it's running. I'm in Oracle VirtualBox. We've created 4 virtual adapters, IntNet, IntNet2, IntNet3, and IntNet4. And our captive portal is running on IntNet2. Now it's a real simple thing to configure any of these to run on one of the networks. And if I look at Xubuntu here, you can see that I have it pointed to IntNet2. So I'm going to bring up Xubuntu. I'm going to bring up the browser and see if it points me to the captive portal. Alright, so I'm going to grab a browser here. I'm going to wait for Xubuntu to bring up this browser. There it comes. And you notice here that it says, oh, you must log into this network before you can access the internet. It has trapped that captive portal login, and it wants us to log in. That's what's happening here. So I'm going to say Open Network Login Page. This is what the pfSense captive portal looks like. And you can see here that I can click Login. And voila, there I am. I'm good to go. So that's what the captive portal looks like and how to set it up in pfSense. You can get super carried away with this, so please go forward and see if you can make a much more complicated captive portal using your own custom web pages. See what that looks like. And I will talk to you in the next movie. Thank you for listening and have a good day.